Thank you for all listening to me today. It's been quite a long journey, which I'm going to explain all about now. But this is my life with type 1 diabetes so far. So from perfection to failure. Back in front of me, great. Right, so all to begin with, it all started a few days before the day I'll never forget. I had the basic symptoms. I was drinking litres and litres of pop and going to the toilet a lot. So naturally I thought I had water infection. So I ended up going down to my local GP and simple blood tests were done. I've had some type 2 diabetes run through the family, so it was easy enough to pick up through my GP, and he just sent me straight to hospital. Later on that evening, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, the doctor came in because he could see I was still awake reading up all about it and confirmed I had type 1 diabetes. Luckily enough, the day happened to be Friday the 13th, 2007. So it was kind of inevitable that I was going to get type 1 diabetes that day. So after the next few days, I basically was in an intense crash course. I learned how to inject, carb count, check my blood sugar, and work all around that and the basics, basically. And it all worked. From the graph starting behind me, over the next 3.5 years, my honeymoon period was great with my HbA1cs. It couldn't have been any better. Everything worked. The ratios, it was easy. I got an insulin pump within those years, and everything was brilliant. I started off with needle phobia, but I got over that really quickly. And my pediatric team walked me through every step of the way. And as a result of my HbA1cs, I got the reputation as the perfect diabetic. And the next part is called the perfect storm for the obvious reasons that happened to my HbA1c. 2011 all went wrong for me. My honeymoon period was ending. I was coming to terms with my sexuality, figuring out that I was gay, and it was easy telling people that I didn't know, or my friends. They were just easy to tell. But my biggest struggle was my family. My pediatric team obviously could see the distress I was getting into with coming out and having to tell my family. It was completely disturbing for me. So more than grateful as I am, and I'll forever be grateful, one of my nurses took me back home and helped me come out to my family, and that I will honestly never, ever forget and be truly grateful for. In that time as well, I have lost the most important person to me was my nana. I could talk to her about anything, and she'd gone. She was taken from me. All that as well going through, I was doing my GCSEs all at the same time, and my first transition clinic. So I was losing that team that helped me through my darkest times and going to people I've never met before. I ended up going to see a child psychologist, and I've always had an older head on my shoulders. I've never really got on with people my own age, and when people try and treat me like a child, I completely disengage. Like there's no point trying to talk to me like a child because it would never work. So my first child psychologist visit was my last. I ended up giving up my insulin pump back because it just wasn't suitable enough for me at the time. I was rebelling against my diabetes, and it didn't make me look normal because I had tubing on me, and it was just attention that I really did not want. The perfect Chris had gone, and failure Chris was taken in his place. Disclosure, I called myself Failure Chris. I was never called Failure Chris, ever. My dark days. These times is, people go through DKA, and yes, of course, they're really bad for anyone to go through. But when I got to my DKAs, they were awful. My rebellious team fully came out when I first fully transitioned into adult clinic. My first DKA was in 2012, and as you can see on the slide, it did scare me, and my HbA1c did decline, but it didn't last for very long. I ended up not caring what people thought. I didn't care what anyone told me. They're not diabetic. Why on earth should I listen to you? Why should I let you tell me to do my insulin? You don't know how it felt. Only I did. I was completely alone. I didn't know anyone else that was diabetic. The high HbA1cs referred me to an adult psychologist, and it was about an hour away from where I live. So, and my mum was working full time, and my sister didn't drive at the time, so I ended up going alone. I arranged hospital transport. But when I got there, I got called into what I thought looked like a teacher's office, and it felt like all I was being told off. All I was told is that you need to do your insulin, you need to check your blood sugars, and I was like, kind of get the point of that, but it's not going to happen. You're just someone else telling me to do something that I do not want to do. So that didn't last very long either. After leaving the teacher's office, I sat in the waiting room ready for my taxi home, and I waited and waited until 4 hours had passed. Luckily, the receptionist saw I was there for a very long time and offered me food, so I'm very grateful to whoever she was. And then I just stopped disengaging with my diabetes team after that. There was no point me going. They were telling me things I didn't want to hear, and I knew best. I was invincible. All these DKAs were just a blip. They were just, I could deal with them myself. I could turn off my emotions like a light switch. I really didn't care. If I wanted to ignore my diabetes, I would. When I ended up slipping and going into hospital with the red lightning strikes behind me, I guaranteed half of my DKAs are nowhere on that screen. Take insulin, drink loads of water, go to bed, you'll get over it. I disengaged with my diabetes team for a good 15 months. There was no point me going after that. And if you look from before 2011 and ignore the rest of the years, during my pediatric years, all I was ever known as was Perfect Chris. And then jump forward to when I was fully transitioned, all they ever knew was failure. So I couldn't win. My turning point. Like I said before, all DKAs are bad. But in 2015 was my complete turning point. One day in 2015, I woke up and I had full symptoms of DKA. I could barely move, I was too weak, and my mum had gone to work early, so I shouted my sister. She could drive at this point, and she was normally the one ending up taking me to the hospital. That day, she'd had a really important job interview, and she'd had enough. She just point blank refused to help me, and I did not blame her at all. Later on that day, she came home, and my mum came home with her at the same time, and I was still in the same place, in my bed. I'd been sick on myself, I'd wet the bed, I was too weak to even move. I hadn't eaten all day, and I had no insulin left in my system, so the DKA just got worse and worse. I ended up getting rushed into hospital with my sister following, and had more blood tests on arrival, and later on when my sister and my mum arrived, the doctor turned around in front of me, my mum and my sister. I was half an hour away from cardiac arrest. I could have died that day. I still didn't care. It wasn't until I looked over at my sister and her face was completely mortified. I'd traumatized my sister into thinking it was her fault, and that destroyed me that day. That's when I knew something had to be changed. I started engaging back with clinic and doing the bare minimum just to keep myself out of hospital, really. And then I was getting referred to the young adult diabetes psychologist, and I avoided her like the plague. But eventually she did find me. After some espionage work between my DSN and the psychologist, they did eventually collar me. I was very reluctant going to see the new therapist after the previous experiences with the child therapist and the adult one myself. I just did not want to go. What was the point? I've been through it all before. Nobody was going to change that. To be honest, I'm not one to open up. I'm not one to talk about my feelings. I'm normally the strong one. I never have time to look after myself, but I make sure I never have time to look after myself. I'll care for everyone else before myself. We eventually started talking, and everything was starting to get really good. As you can see with the green line on the first green line going downwards, everything was going really well. I started engaging. I was doing my insulin, checking my blood sugars, carb counting, and everything went extremely well. I got discharged from the young adult diabetes psychologist. And at that time, I thought it would be a good idea to start all over again and go back to college. It was the best decision I've made, and I'm still there now. But the new skills that I had learned to keep everything down and keep everything working well, I started to forget, and I cared about other people before myself again. So as you can see, my blood sugar my HbA1c rose straight back up. And that's when my actual adult clinic had to intervene then and reintroduce me to the same young adult psychologist. And then everything started to work again. It's such a big thing going into psychology, especially when you're not emotional or you just don't like talking to anyone. But you have to find the right person that works for you. You have to find that bond that someone has with you that doesn't want you to completely focus on the diabetes. They want to see every aspect of your life. They want to see where you tick and the way you work. And that is how I bonded. My future. Like I said, I'm back in college. I'm doing my access into university, hopefully to get into the university I want to become a nurse. And then maybe in possible future, I would love to become a DSN, a diabetic specialist nurse, to help people like overcome the times. For that one stubborn teenager to turn around and say to you, but you're not diabetic, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, I am. I know what I'm talking about. I know what you're going through. And taking time for myself. And the things I'm working on is learning to bond with my diabetes, that it's part of me and I'm not part of it. And then brings me back to my title, From Perfection to Failure. And now I'm somewhere in between. Taking my advice, some advice I can give to everyone sitting here today. Listen to your patients. Put your pens down. I don't want to look at the top of your head while you're writing notes on me, because it makes me feel awful. I don't know what you're writing. Save that for later. And actually engage with me. Any of you sitting here today can say it's okay. You don't have to be a psychologist. You don't have to have a course. You're human. Just sit down and ask if everything's okay. Doesn't take much. Child or adult, or going through the transition, talking about someone's emotions going through diabetes, it's essential. Completely from when they're diagnosed. They need to know about the dark times. And obviously you can use the From Talking Type 1 Diabetes range created by Dr. Rose Stewart. Shameless plug. And then emotional groups, people like me. Yes, it'll be difficult trying to get people like me in the same room because we really don't care, but it will work. And this is all being launched by Sarah later on with Sarah and Connect. When is a DKA not a DKA? When you go and visit people in wards and they're sitting there, they're feeling sick, they're feeling sorry for themselves, you need to see if you can make that decision. Is it an actual DKA or a cry for help? And once again, are you really, really listening to me? Are you listening to all of us? Because just sitting down and asking if someone okay is the most important part. Thank you.